where we're creating a multi-user dungeon game using the Swift programming language and the NIO networking framework. And after we last time spent implementing sessions, we will now implement rooms, so there can actually be some sort of world for our players. So let's start. So what we first will need is we will need to create something to represent our rooms, and for that we make a new Swift file called room.swift, and we'll create a struct room. And because we want to be able to save these rooms out, we will persist them in our database. So we have our awesome DB, and we have a DB type, so we will let room conform to DB type, and that means that we need at the very least an ID. But what else do we want to know about the rooms? Perhaps a room has a name, and perhaps a room also has a description, something you see when you start looking around. And let's also create what I call a formatted description. This is what we will echo back to our player when they look around the room. And let's start with the name, and then the description. I'm not yet sure whether we need a new line here or whether it's added automatically, but we can check that at the later type when we start testing this out. So we have a name and the description. I think we also need is something to define where you can go from this room, sort of like the exits from this room. And let's create a different structure called an exit. And because we need to save them out into this database type that conforms to codable, this one too we want to have as codable, and this should have two things. It should have a direction, something like east, west, up, down. Do we want a string here? No, we'll create an actual direction. So we have a direction, and we will have a target room ID, and that's it. So basically an exit will define the direction you have to move in, something like north, and then the room where you will end up after you went north. This also means that an exit by itself only goes in one direction, so it goes from one room to the other. If you want to be able to go back from the other room to the first room, then we need a separate exit going from there back. So by default they only go in one way. That brings a bit more work in creating the world, but also a bit more flexibility, because now you can make something like a one-way direction, something like a slide where you a slippery slope where you can go down but you can't go back up, something like that. So we have a direction and a target room, And what else do we need? We need some direction. So let's say we have north and south and east. Oh my. West, up, down, in and out. That should be enough for now to model a lot of cases. In, out is useful when entering and exiting buildings, up, down for stairs, north, south, east, west for moving around in cardinal directions. What is probably also useful is having an opposite. So we have a direction, and by calling the opposite you get the other one. So if we're going north, we return south. This is just a bit of future-proofing. I think this should be enough for now. So we have a description. We have we can add the exits. They will still be very ugly this way, but it should be enough for now. An array of exits. This should be enough for now. So we have a room, and this means that we can start implementing something like a look command. So let's first do that. We create a new verb. It won't take any arguments because we just go and look around. Therefore, it only requires one word, and we create a case. Look. So this pattern should be quite familiar by now. It also means we need to go to the parse handler and add the look case. And this one is a bit more complex in a way because we need to have the player ID here. We have a first for a username, but we don't yet have. We only have in the session the player ID. So we need a way of converting the player ID into a player. What I will do is I'll create a separate function for the look command that takes a session, is an asynchronous function, and returns MUD response, because that will otherwise be a bit too much code in here, and I don't like these switch cases to become overly long. So let's first try and get the player. I think our user only has a method of finding based on a user ID, but if we also add a static function find based on a user ID, and that returns possibly a user, then we can do await first where ID equals ID. So now we can do something like guard let user equals await user dot find session dot player ID else then, so we now have a user. Oh, the player ID is an optional. We don't yet know whether we know a player here. There's either two solutions. I think the easiest one is to have this one also accept an optional, where we say if ID equals nil, or just return nil as a value. We assume that if ID is not set to a value, we always know that we'll never find a user. And then this one requires a return. Okay, so now we should have, this one should be acceptable. We have our user, we can't find the user with player ID. If we can, we need to find a room that the player is in, and I don't think yet we have, we're not storing anything about where the player is. I think what we need a current room ID. So it will be sort of a foreign key to a rooms database, and it can either be set or it can be nil, and if it's nil we don't yet have a room. I think that when you start the game and create your user, you don't immediately are in a room, you're sort of in limbo, and you need to do something to get into an actual room. So let's first see if we have a room ID. So we have a user dot current room ID else. We'll return a MUD response called and that's all we'll do. If we have an actual room ID, then we need to find the room. So we should have something like let room be room dot find and then something like room ID. And if that doesn't work, we'll say and if this does work, then we can finally return a MUD response where we're saying room dot what did we call it? Oh. Okay, room doesn't yet have a find method, so we should add that. So we'll have a static func find based on ID. an asynchronous function that might return a room. We'll use the same one here as in the other one. We'll use the same pattern as in user, so it also accepts an optional, and if id equals nil, we return nil. Otherwise we return our rooms database that not yet exists, so we need a private static var all rooms. Will be an awesome DB, and this one will be of type awesome DB room. Return all rooms first where the ID equals ID. And it is indeed an asynchronous function. So now we have our find method here. That's also an asynchronous function, so we should await response. This also means that we can now return look session. Oh wait, look session. This should now allow us to look around in our game. Let's see if this compiles. There's still an error here, but I can't really yet understand why it would be complaining. Oh, I understand. We're returning somewhere else. And this will be the updated session. And it'll probably be a lot happier right now. Building. Building. So the build is complete. Run. Okay. So we have a new look command, but we are not logged in, so we don't have a player. We should try log in. So welcome back. Now if you look around, it says we're in limbo because we're not in any room. So let's stop here for a bit. So I think we have two challenges. First is we don't have any rooms, and we currently don't have a way of getting a first room, a room to start in. I think there are two possible solutions. One is we could simply create a rooms.json file and fill it with a first room, something to play around in. And I think that might not be such a bad solution actually. So let's do that. And also we have no way of getting our player into the first room, but I think we can also do that if we just hack the the user JSON file a bit. So I think we can clean up that at a later time. So we need our build folder, and we should create a new file here. Can I create a new file here? And now here, then I can say touch rooms.json. I should also have a rooms.json file. I can open it using Xcode, and I can start typing away and creating a room. And a room is an array. Why aren't you allowing me to change it? Perhaps we first need to add some data in it. So we have an array, and the array contains rooms, which are an object, and the room has an ID. Need something there. The room has a name, the very first room, and it has a description. Nothing special to see here. And it has exits, but these exits are another array, and I'll start with an empty array. Now I need an ID, so I need to get myself a simple user UUID. Let's see if there's any 0 version or something like that. Otherwise we'll just reuse this one. So this will be our first room, and when we open, we change our users.json. Open with Xcode. We have a username. Apparently Xcode doesn't really want to change these files, but fortunately we also still have a terminal. So we need to add a current room ID, and we'll use the same one here. I think we're still missing a comma. Hope this works. So let's start it again. So we log in, we look around, but let's see, line 6, column 2, okay. This of course was to be expected when I try and create my own this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, we're missing a comma. Let's give it another go. So we now are in our very special first room where nothing special is to see and where there are no exits. You can see exits. Something like this. I think we have a little bit of time. One thing I want to do is I want to make sure that when you enter this command you're also logged in. So I'll add another property of for this verb enum, and I'll call it it requires login, and this will return a pool, and by default will return true. We switch statement on self. Instead of close, that won't require it. Create user won't require it. And login won't require it. This way in our parse handler we can on one place check in our verb handler we can check whether we have enough. Where was I doing this? I think it was here. We were checking the amount of data. Alright, it was here. So here we can say guard, and this again needs to be a function just like this because we don't yet have constructed the actual verb. So this will be a bool. So we'll take in the verb uppercased. I'll say if we enter close or create user or login, then we can return false, and then we can do something like requires login. Now, of course, we don't yet know whether we have logged in here yet. There's no session here. So this indeed needs to be simply a property. I'm sorry, sorry everyone for causing this confusion. We can't do this check here right now. So again, this needs to be dot close or dot create user, and we'll switch on self or on login. And in our parse handler here we need to make sure that we have our command. We'll if a verb that requires login, and updated session dot player ID is nil. Then we want to bail basically. So we'll say that response equals response updated session. You need to be logged in to use this command. And if everything goes okay, then we can do this entire switch statement. Let's give this a go. I'm sorry, that's our verb command. Verb. So if we now try and look, it says you need to be logged in to use this command. If I first log in and I look around, this works. Let's make this a little bit more interesting and take another UUID and create a different room, and let's try and connect those rooms together. So we have, and I really think I should be using something like Visual Studio Code for this JSON authoring, but who cares? Yeah, it's probably a better idea. So we'll use Visual Studio Code. We'll open file. So we need to go all the way to, oh my, it's not showing the hidden, so-called hidden folders. Okay, perhaps it'll accept this. Okay. The second room over here either, and this second one also needs a unique identifier. I'll just reuse this one, and now let's try and get these two connected to each other. I'll at least create an exit here, and that contains a direction, for instance north, and it contains what did we call it? We called it target room ID. And we'll have an additional exit here, going back. Oh, I'm sorry. This definitely is still an object. So we have second exit here called direction, and it will go south, and we'll have a target room ID, and that will be this ID. And this looks like a more or less well-formed JSON file. Let's see if it works. So we'll restart the server. We'll open our terminal. We'll log in. We'll look around. And of course something went wrong here. Let's see, we have a direction. We have our, where's my room? Okay, we need to find a way back from direction to I think they're now coded as integers, encodable, but I think it will be nicer if these are, we do this as strings, because then we can just use the more the normal data here. Let's give it another go. So now it's at the rooms, and now you can see that it's also sees the exit here. Doesn't look that beautiful. Well, that's the last thing we're going to do today. We'll create a var exit as a string, and we'll say we have our directions. We only want to show the directions. We'll take the exits and map these to our direction.raw value, so just a string value, and then we'll return direction joined separated by a space. And now we can, instead of the raw exits array, we can use exits as string, and if we run this, now we see an exit to the north, but we can't use it yet. But that's moving between rooms will be what we're going to do in the not the next one, but the one after that. We did a lot of quick coding here. I think some cleanup on project organization is also getting a bit larger. It's a good idea. And then in episode 8 we will start looking at getting the player to move around from location to location. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.